Chapter 3 Art for Heart's Sake. In the preface to his novel The Picture of Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde famously opined, "All art is quite useless." I alluded to the sentiment earlier, when I defined art as anything that's both uncannily beautiful and practically of no use. I intended the practically part of my definition to be ambiguous. On the one hand, it's true that art is essentially useless in terms of practical applications. It's also my experience and observation that art isn't altogether purposeless. On the subject of art's uselessness as a core part of its aesthetic, I'm a longtime fan of art for art's sake. This phrase is often erroneously attributed to Wilde, but it's actually a translation of l'art pour l'art, which appeared long before Wilde was born in the preface to the 1835 French novel Mademoiselle de Maupin by Théophile Gautier. Regardless of the phrase's origins, art for art's sake means that art doesn't need a reason besides itself to exist. Art isn't required to serve a utilitarian purpose, and artists have no responsibility to justify their work. Artists simply do, and art simply is. I'm down with that. It seems obvious enough that art, in a real-world sense, is 99% pointless. You can't eat other people's words. You can't seek shelter from the elements in their paintings. Creative expression doesn't increase people's IQs or make them more ethical. It's too bad, really, because Lord knows we need all the help we can get. When it comes to having any meaningful impact on your audience, you're lucky if your art entertains, and you're truly blessed if it manages to inspire. Where art does have a potentially life-changing purpose, however, is in its own creation. For the artist, all art is, or at least has the ability to be, art therapy. Art can clear the cobwebs from the head, and even more crucially, repair the cracks in the heart. Especially since Byron's death and losing my power animal for a while, I can't tell you how many times art has pulled me out of a wicked funk. After my nocturnal encounter with the albino owl that set me on my artistic way, the thing that kept bringing me back to art was the feelings creating it gave me, elation and freedom, in a world that seemed, as it still does, expressly designed to erase just such emotions from our collective memory. When I entered school, I discovered that transcending the real world, rooted in rote learning and limitation, the imaginary world of art was all about possibilities. In school, I was just, as Pink Floyd put it, another brick in the wall. But with words and images, I could go anywhere, create anything. The upshot was that I ended up scribbling and doodling more than I studied. So maybe art's just a mode of escapism, but I'll take that. It's certainly a lot cheaper, not to mention safer, than heroin. You can smack me up with art any day. To hell with reality, I've said to myself on countless occasions when I was up to my eyeballs in bullshit. Well into my 40s, I was primarily interested in writing. I'd always considered myself a writer first and foremost. Visual art was just a hobby, an amusing pastime that allowed me to switch my brain into a different creative mode and decompress. In 2010, this dynamic began to change when I was inspired to take painting more seriously by my friend John Dupuy, a famous modernist painter who was anarchist author Edward Abbey's best buddy and the model for Doc Sarvis in one of the ultimate tales of creative destruction and civil disobedience, The Monkey Wrench Gang. John's otherworldly landscapes, which I viewed in person for the first time at an opening in Taos, were the quintessence of estrangement, engaging the viewer like semi-abstract, full-color memories from a better life in a more beautiful dimension. Later, unable to stop thinking about attempting my own defamiliarizing visual artworks, I asked John to give me a few pointers for getting started, and he was kind enough to oblige. He even expressed admiration for some of my early pieces. The first art studio I had was the dining room table in an adobe house with a view of a sagebrush mesa near the Rio Grande and the high desert of New Mexico. I painted mostly with India inks on paper in those days. But occasionally, I worked on canvas, sometimes mixing my inks with a gesso medium to create a unique type of paint. For the better part of 2 years, I threw away more works than I kept, as I endeavored to define my artistic vision. Curiously enough, 3 of my pieces from this early phase, including Thunderbird and Crow Rising, were later featured on the covers of Itzhak Beery's best-selling books on shamanism, published by Inner Traditions. Chalk it up to beginner's luck. Speaking of, luck is exactly how I happened upon my distinctive style with ink. I call it one brush technique because, duh, most of the time it uses only one brush. It was only after I started employing this personalized technique that I felt enough like a real artist to begin signing my paintings on the front. While working on a piece in 2011 titled California Poppies, I discovered, entirely by accident, that I could pick up ink from the well with a hard bristled brush like a little claw and deposit it straight onto the paper without moving it around. India ink that's not too diluted leaves a permanent line when applied this way. This meant that when I finally did spread the ink, the pattern from its original placement remained behind like a tattoo. This effect is clearly visible in the blue sky above the poppy field. I have no way of knowing whether this technique is unique to my work, but I did have the satisfaction of coming up with it myself and subsequently developing it on my own over the years. I'm still exploring its possibilities. Painting with ink is always a bit tricky. Generally speaking, as I've discovered the hard way, inks don't forget. But with enough coaxing, occasionally they can be persuaded to forgive. Variations on one brush technique show up in many of my paintings, including Dreamcatcher, which serves as the background to the figure of the flying boy on the cover of my award-winning visionary novel about lucid dreaming, Snooze, A Story of Awakening. In this painting that many people have appreciated, I first used one brush technique to leave ragged little segments of white paper visible beneath the ink. I did some of my best work using this technique in my second studio, a sunny, oversized bathroom looking out on a xeriscaped atrium in a mid-century condo in Palm Springs, California. To this day, that remains the best painting space I've ever had. Even in my most uninspired moments, I can state with confidence my work there was rarely crappy. After moving from the West Coast to my small island, I started feeling the need to evolve my painting in new directions to respond to the changes in vibe and scenery. I began incorporating acrylics and clear tar gel, sometimes over and or mixed with ink, while adding wood panel to my repertoire of painting surfaces. The results have been encouraging. Panel is fascinating to work on with a painting knife, aka palette knife. I've been able to create lots of texture and a certain distressed look by cutting into and even scraping away paint. Tide Pool, which quickly became part of a private collection, is a good example of this approach. Tide Pool Reflection, which also sold almost as soon as I finished it, was done using a similar method on paper. As I write this, I'm preparing for a one-man exhibit at a respected local gallery in April. That leaves just over 6 months to get my act together. It will be my first solo show and my first opening, and yes, I'm a little nervous. I'm also pumped to share my work with the public this way. In theory, I'm supposed to come up with a theme to tie together the pieces in the show. The only idea I've had so far is way too cheesy to go with, despite the fact it's absolutely true when it comes to the real reason I paint: art for heart's sake.